This is part 2 of chapter 81. An even better known champion, quote, of that order which the supreme ruler has chosen and established for the populating of the earth, end of quote, was J.P. Soesmilch, 1707 to 1767, a chaplain in the armies of Frederick the Great. His popular divine order in the changes of the human race, shown by its birth, death, and propagation in 1741, hailed Grant as a Columbus who had discovered a new world of demography. Quote, "We enter on the land of the living step by step and without crowding, and in accordance with certain set numbers bearing a certain set proportion to the army of the living and the army of the departing. Note, too, in this emergence from the void into being, there always come 21 sons to 20 daughters. Also that the whole mass of those coming to the light of day is always a little greater than those returning to dust. And the army of the human race is always growing in set proportions." End of quote. Governments should shape their policy to ensure increase because, quote, "God himself has pronounced in favor of a large population." End of quote. A half-century later, Malthus attacked Soesmilch for his naive generalizations about the differences between city and country, and for his failure to include the years of epidemic. But the champions of natural theology erased the stigma of sacrilege from the study of human mortality, and an official British census was finally taken in 1801. The numbers, 9 million for England and Wales plus 1.5 million for Scotland, seem to prove that God intended man's numbers to increase. But the shocking rate of increase over Gregory King's estimate of 5.5 million in 1688 would be grist for the mills of Malthus and the evolutionists. Census taking and a science of statistics grew up together, providing the modern vocabulary of the social sciences, national economy, and international relations. Adolphe Quetelet, 1796 to 1874, born in Ghent, began teaching mathematics at the age of 17. As a young man, he wrote poetry, collaborated on an opera, served as apprentice in an artist's studio, and painted interesting canvases of his own. He received the first doctorate from the new University of Ghent for a paper on analytic geometry, which made him famous and secured his election to the Belgian Academy. At 23, he was named professor of mathematics, and then drew crowds to his brilliant lectures on esoteric scientific subjects. When he proposed establishing a national observatory, the government sent him to Paris to learn from the French experience. There, the dynamic Laplace focused his interest on the study of probability. On his return to Belgium, he was appointed astronomer at the new Brussels Royal Observatory. While the astronomical observatory was under construction, the restless Quetelet turned to observing society and began collecting social facts for a new science of statistics. While sharing the speculations of French mathematicians and astronomers in Paris, he had felt, quote, "the need to join to the study of celestial phenomena the study of terrestrial phenomena, which had not been possible till now," end of quote. Nor had he lost his artist's interest in the shape and measurement of the human body. In Brussels, he began gathering what he called moral statistics. From the mass of undigested figures, he separated out all the statistics on human beings. These included supposedly trivial figures on the physical dimensions of the human body, along with facts on crimes and criminals. Quote, "that which relates to the human species, considered in mass," end of quote, he assumed, is, quote, "of the order of physical facts," end of quote. He noticed, for example, that the number of crimes committed each year by persons in each age group was remarkably constant. Was there perhaps a kind of budget for these acts, established by laws of social physics? The 3 sets of figures he selected, for crimes, for suicides, and for marriages, with each classified by age groups, he called moral statistics, for all these were cases where the individual had a choice of action. Yet in them, too, he found impressive statistical regularities. Quetelet enlarged statistics to mean data about humankind. The earliest known use of the word, German Statistik, a synonym for Staatswissenschaft, 1672, had meant a science of the state, or statecraft. And during the 18th century, it described the study of constitutions, natural resources, and the policy of states. Sir John Sinclair, as we have seen, used statistics as a name for assessment of, quote, the quantum of happiness, end of quote, enjoyed by the people of a country and their means of future improvement. Quetelet came to the subject not from politics or economics, but from an interest in mathematics, in probability, and in human norms. In his Treatise on Man and the Development of His Faculties, an essay on social physics, 1835, English translation 1842, which made him famous across the continent, he proposed his original notion of, quote, the average man, end of quote. From the quantitative data Quetelet had collected on the human body, he concluded that, quote, regarding the height of men of one nation, the individual value group themselves symmetrically around the mean according to the law of accidental causes, end of quote. This confirmed his notion of, quote, the average man, end of quote, which for any nation, quote, is actually the type or the standard, and other men differ from him by more or less only through the influence of accidental causes, whose effects became calculable when the number of trials is sufficiently large, end of quote. He called his law of accidental causes, quote, a general law, which applies to individuals as well as to peoples and which governs our moral and intellectual qualities just as it does our physical qualities, end of quote. The average height of men of similar age in a particular nation was the mean around which variations would oscillate symmetrically around the mean in the pattern of a binomial or normal distribution. Other physical characteristics, he ventured, might follow the same rule, and his theoretical prediction corresponded impressively with the figures on weight and on chest circumference. In 1844, Quetelet astonished skeptics by applying his notions to discover the extent of draft evasion in the French army. By comparing his figures for the probable distribution of men of different heights with the actual distribution of height found among 100,000 young Frenchmen who answered the call for the draft, he ventured that about 2,000 men had avoided conscription by pretending to be less than the minimum height. From statistics in 1826 to 31 of the French courts, he concluded, quote, the constancy with which the same crimes repeat themselves every year with the same frequency and provoke the same punishment in the same ratios is one of the most curious facts. And every year the numbers have confirmed my prevision in a way that I can even say, there is a tribute man pays more regularly than those owed to nature or to the treasury, the tribute paid to crime. Sad condition of the human race. We can tell beforehand how many will stain their hands with the blood of their fellow creatures, how many will be forgers, how many poisoners, almost as one can foretell the number of births and deaths. Society contains the germs of all the crimes that will be committed, as well as the conditions under which they can develop. It is society that in a sense prepares the ground for them, and the criminal is the instrument. End of quote. Quetelet was attacked, of course, for using social physics to deny the individual's power to choose between good and evil. But he retorted that now, at last, statistics revealed the forces already at work in society and so created, quote, the possibility of improving people by modifying their institutions, their habits, their education, and all that influences their behavior, end of quote. The pious Florence Nightingale, 1820 to 1910, who had been personally called to her work by the voice of God, was the unlikely champion of this new science. She made Quetelet her hero, considered his social physics her second Bible, and annotated every page of her presentation copy. Since statistics were the measure of God's purpose, the study of statistics became another of her proclaimed religious duties. Quote, let us apply to the political and moral sciences, read Laplace's motto on the title page of Quetelet's treatise. Quote, the method founded on observation and mathematics that has served us so well in the natural sciences, end of quote. For Quetelet, The new science of statistics offered nothing less than an international lexicon for a science of improving society. Quote, "The more advanced the sciences have become," Quetelet added, "the more they have tended to enter the domain of mathematics, which is a sort of center toward which they converge. We can judge of the perfection toward which a science has come by the facility, more or less great, with which it may be approached by calculation." End of quote. An energetic statesman in the new parliaments of science, Quetelet frequently sent his incremental discoveries to the academies and published fragments in their proceedings. His prodigious correspondence with 2,500 scientists, politicians, and men of letters, including Gauss, Ampere, Faraday, Alexander von Humboldt, Goethe, James A. Garfield, Lemuel Shattuck, Joseph Henry, Prince Albert, and King Leopold the First of the Belgians, proselytized for his new science of statistics. Quetelet organized people across Europe and America to gather census data that could serve as moral statistics. He urged Charles Babbage, 1792 to 1871, to found the Statistical Society of London in 1834. Then he made the Crystal Palace Exposition in London in 1851 a forum for international cooperation, which only 3 years later produced the first International Statistical Congress in 1854 at Brussels. As first president, he preached the need for uniform procedures and terminology. Quetelet's influence was crucial during these formative years of the social sciences. International statistics, some said, were Quetelet's own splendid creation. On them, Western peoples would base extravagant expectations for the lessons of quantitative data in public health, politics, and education. Meanwhile, totalitarian governments would relapse to the age of secrecy. In the 20th century, the public numbers would dominate discussions of national welfare and international relations. Such notions as national and per capita income, gross national product, rates of growth and development, developed and underdeveloped nations, and population growth would be a legacy of Quetelet and his disciples. By 1900, the International Statistical Institute, which had been urging publication of all censuses, reported that currently some 68 censuses covered about 43% of the world's population. Their proposed world census of population was still in the future. And that concludes Chapter 81.